Uh, Hi everyone. Morning, afternoon, or evening from wherever you guys are joining. So yeah, Ashna introduced, right? Welcome to Mixpanel's Q&A for developers, right? And not only just for developers, this webinar is also for product managers who want our product analytics tool like Mixpanel on their platform, right? One of the few questions that always comes up during implementation of an analytical tool is that how do you define what is to be implemented and how this is to be implemented, right? So these are some of the questions that we are going to tackle. Before we start off, I do want to touch base upon how exactly Mixpanel looks in the background, right? It's not going to be a detailed version of it, so I'll be taking you all through a high level model of how Mixpanel is with inside, right? So Mixpanel can be visualized as having two data stores, right? One could be behaviors or events, and the other can be considered as a user table, right? So this could be considered as a dimension and a fact table. So you have events, which are like the fact table, which would have all the events. With these events, you would also have information about the event that describes the event that the user has performed, right? So these would be in the form of event properties. Now, when it comes to user table, with the user identifier, what you would also have is information about the user. Now, these could be meta information that you capture on your platform, or this could be any other information that you have about the user that you would want to hold, right? Now, these two data stores are connected to each other using something called as a distinct ID. Now, distinct ID is Mixpanel's unique identifier. So it could be visualized in this format, right? So it is a one-to-end relation. So you have like one user who would be having multiple events that the user would be generating on your platform. Now, talking more about events and user properties, right? Event properties are immutable in nature. So they are a historical snapshot of the event when the event happened. So let's say, for example, you have something called, for example, let's take city as one of the examples. So when you were in a particular city and you opened your application and you did an event, the event property city would hold the information about the city where the action actually took place. However, when you move over to user profile properties, where you are actually also capturing information about the city of a user, this is mutable in nature. That means if tomorrow you move cities and you again open your application and do a particular activity, user profile property of the user profile property city would hold the latest value of the city that you are in, right? With events and user properties, what we also have is something called as super properties. Now, super property is a concept made for client-side SDKs that Mixpanel have, which allow you to pass certain properties to all events that are happening on your platform. This makes implementation of certain event properties a bit more convenient for developers. Now, while we also talk about properties, the certain more information that we want about properties are the data types that Mixpanel supports. So Mixpanel supports 5 data types. So we have string, numeric, Boolean, date, and list. Now, each of them are equally important. So numeric, when you are sending a property in numeric data type, it allows you to do mathematical operations. String allows you to have alphanumeric values. Boolean allows you to have true and false values for certain flag that you want to send as properties. Date is expected to be sent in an ISO format and very specifically in UTC time zone. The reason for that is whenever you create a project in Mixpanel, you do specify your time zone that you want the project to be in. And when you send a date format in UTC time zone, what Mixpanel does for you is it adds the offset that you have with the time zone that you have selected for your project, right? Now, apart from these 4, the 5th data type that Mixpanel supports is list. So if you have a comma separated array list that you want to pass on to Mixpanel and you want the list to be done a proper analysis and not just send it as a string, you can send it as a comma separated value, right? There are proper ways of sending it. So we highly recommend you go through our articles on list data type, which will give you a much more proper specification on that. Now, while we talk about data types, right, that properties support, we also have something called as special operations on user profile properties. Since user profile properties are mutable in nature, we do allow certain special operations on these user profile properties. Some of them are listed over here. So we have incremental operation, which are for user profile properties that are numeric in nature. So if you have a lifetime value of as a user profile property, and you want to increment it every time there is an action, a specific action that a user has taken, you can use the incremental operation for that. Let's, for example, let's say you are a music platform and you have a user profile property that holds the preferences of genres that a user has on your platform, right? Now you want to update this list every time a user on your platform updates their preference on genres. That's exactly where we have list updates. So you can update your list of genre preferences of your user on your platform. Let's say, coming back to the example of lifetime value, right? You want to ensure that lifetime value is set as 0 only for the new users that come onto your platform, right? You do not want older users to have their lifetime value set to 0. Now, to ensure that does not happen, that's exactly why we have set once as operation. Set once, what it does for you is that the moment you use set once instead of setting of a user profile property, if that property exists for that profile, it would not change the value. However, if that property does not exist for that profile, Mixpanel will set a default value for that profile that you have mentioned when calling the set once. Unset, as it says, it removes a specific property from the user profile. Now, this is something that if you are going away or deprecating a certain profile property on Mixpanel or on your platform, you can absolutely go ahead and unset those user profile properties. Now, talking about implementing Mixpanel. Now, before we start implementing Mixpanel, it is very essential for you to know how in what way do you want to implement Mixpanel, right? So we talked about the 2 data stores in the data model, and that's exactly how you would have to implement Mixpanel as well. So what I'll be taking you all through right now is I will be showing you an example of an event and different types of properties that are associated with the event, or a user profile property that is based on the event, right? I'll be taking you all I'll be taking you all through the example, and I will be also explaining you what exactly method calls that need to be sent to at code level on your product to ensure that the Mixpanel events are sent appropriately, right? So let's go to the example where you are a music platform, right? And you have an event called as song played, which would be triggered every time a user plays a song, right? Now, whenever you are sending the event of song played, you have certain properties that you want to send with the event. Let's say you have the title of the song, or you also have the genre of the song, right? Now, this is how I have documented this event. So the name of the event is song played. I have mentioned the trigger for the developers to know when to send this event. With this event, I want event property, which would be genre. The data type of that would be string, and sample values could be rock. Now, this value could change based on the situation in which the user is and what value they need to pass. Now, this is something called as an event property. But before that, what I want is I have a super property which needs to be registered for that user, and that is a song play count. Now, this needs to be updated every time the song is played, but just before the song is played. So the count that goes with the event song played is the updated song play count. Now, once this has been done, now the user has played the song. I want the user's profile property called as last genre, which holds the latest genre of the song that the user had played. to be updated to rock. Now, how is this to be implemented? So the very first thing, and this is an example for the JavaScript SDK that would be most commonly used for your web platforms. So what you would have to do is you would have to call mixpanel.init. Now, what it does, it initializes Mixpanel on your platform. One of the arguments, which is a mandatory argument that you would have to send with the init function, is that you would have to send the project token. Now, the project token is something that you would find in your Mixpanel setting whenever in your project settings. And these are something that would be visible to your project owners and admins. Apart from that, the second argument is if there are any very specific configurations that you need to make, you could add them. And the third argument, again, being optional in nature, which is if you have a practice of renaming instances on your at coding level as best practices, we absolutely allow you guys to rename instances of Mixpanel as well. So this is about initializing Mixpanel. The next thing that we would be doing is we want to register the super property. So you want to update the super property song play count before you are sending the event, right? Now, when you do that, you call mixpanel.register and you pass song play count with the value 4 because that's the updated count, right? Now, once you have done that, what would happen is in your local storage, this value would be stored. And every time you send a track event or an event from your platform to Mixpanel, this property would be appended to the event. And the next step would be to call mixpanel.track because you want to send this event on whenever a user triggers a song. So the mixpanel.track has two set of arguments. So the first argument would be the name of the event that you need to be sending. So that would be song played. I highly recommend you guys that Mixpanel is a case sensitive platform. So whatever you have documented, if you have documented it in this format where you have spaces between words and the first letter of the word is capitalized, you would be sending the event in the same way, right? So that would be your event name. The next argument would be an object of all your of all your event properties as a key value pair, which would be comma separated in nature. So your key over here is genre, which is your property name, and your value would be the value of this, the genre value of the song. So in this case, let's say it's rock, right? Now this track event essentially will send to Mixpanel as an event, which you would be seeing, right? Now, once I have played the song, like I have mentioned, that we want to update this this as a user profile property. So we have every user on your platform has a user profile property called as last genre. Now, this user's latest genre played on the platform needs to be updated to rock. So what you would be doing is you would be calling mixpanel.people.set, and you would be sending in the key value pair of the property name and the value that needs to be updated. This is how you send implement Mixpanel on your platform, right? Now, while we were registering for this webinar, right, there were a few questions as to, hey, while we are implementing Mixpanel, is there a way to debug whether the implementation has been done correctly or not? And that's absolutely a very good question, right? We do have certain features in our UI which allow you to actually debug if the implementation is being done correctly or not. And for that reason, what I will be doing is I will be taking you all through a quick demonstration of how events can be implemented on our platform, right? Let's do, so what I have done is I have opened an instance of, so let's say I have created this dummy website. It's called Music Finder. Now this is a music platform, right? Like I said, I have initialized Mixpanel and I have put in my project token as well. So the very first thing that we want to do is we want to call mixpanel.register. So what it does is it will ensure that I want to have my super property song play count set as 4, right? So let's do this. So what I'll be doing is I'll be doing song play count. and I would want to set the value as 4. Now, please do keep in mind that the way I'm sending 4 is not as a string because they are not under double quotes, but they are under no quotes. That means Mixpanel will treat this as a numeric property. Now, when this happens, you would notice that we have in your cookie something called as so song play count. So you see over here, the song play count over here is updated to 4, right? Now, at this point of time, the next thing that we want to do is we want to send in Mixpanel dot track, and we'll be sending in, let's say the event name is song played. And the next thing we are going to do is we are going to send in the property genre, and the value of this would be rock. Yeah, so you see now we have sent this to we have sent this value over here. Now the very first thing is that, hey, I have sent this event, but I do not know if it has reached Mixpanel or not. So when you go to your project, you would be seeing over here something called as an events section, right? Now, the moment you go over here, you should be seeing the live event. Oh, I have to change my project. So we'll have to go to the right project. So the moment we go to the right project and we go over here to the event section, you would see song played as an event live flowing into your Mixpanel project, right? So you see over here that when you click on this and expand, you would see there are a lot of properties that are sent along with song played. Now, these are not certain properties that you had sent with the event, because you notice that you had sent only genre as one of the events. Now, this is where you see 3 tabs. Now, you do know that when you use Mixpanel's SDK, there are certain default values that Mixpanel captures and sends with the event. Now, these could be browser information, geographical information, the URL from which it came, the distinct ID that Mixpanel uses against every user, and other information about the screen and screen height and screen width. Now, with that, we also capture the time when it was sent to when the event generated on Mixpanel. Now, coming to your properties, the ones that are custom sent by you, you would notice that genre is something that is sent, which was expected in nature since we sent it with the event. However, with that, we also notice something called a song play count that is being sent. Now, this is your super property, which was registered before sending the event. So every event that is being sent to Mixpanel post registration of a super property would hold this value unless and until these are either removed or cleared from your from your super property list, or if they have been updated as a value. Now, so the user's song play count has been updated. We have registered it as a super property. We have also sent in the song played event, right? Now, once this has been done, the next thing that we want to do is we want to update this user's profile property called as the last genre, right? Now, before going into that, right, it is very important to understand that while this user has played a song, this user has not been registered or logged into my platform. Now, there are a lot of platforms that allow you to do or explore a particular platform before actually registering or logging in, right? And that's where ID management comes into picture. So whenever there is a successful registration or a successful login, what you would be doing as a platform is, while you do capture other credentials, you would be generating a user ID for this user. So let's say that once you have generated this user, what you have done is you will be calling Mixpanel dot identify, right? Now, what identify does is that identify registers. Registers a user within Mixpanel and starts identifying it rather from the distinct ID, but starts identifying the user with your own user ID. So let's say your user ID is Mixpanel 123, right? This is the user ID that you have generated every time a user successfully registers on your platform. And every time a user logs in, this is the user ID that you get in response against the credentials with which the user has logged in. So whenever there is a successful registration, a successful login, or if the user is coming onto your platform in a logged in state, we highly recommend you call identify. So now once you have called identify, the user has been identified and the profile is ready to be created for this user, right? So now what we will be doing is we will be calling mixpanel.people.set. And what we want to do is we want to update this user's profile property. So one of the profile property that we discussed in the example was last genre. So we have the last genre, and the value that we want to send is rock, because the rock was the last, the genre of the last song that the user had played was rock. Now, the moment I do this, you want to go back and you want to check whether this has been implemented or not. But the moment you call this out, what you see is that you have the identified event that you see over here, but you do not have any event around setting a people property. And the reason for that is going back to the data model that we have for Mixpanel, right? You do not, what we do is events when sent as when events are sent in events data store, these are something that you would be seeing over here. Any updation any updating of a user profile property is not seen as an event, but this is something that you would be seeing as a profile property update. So the moment you go into this user's profile, you would be seeing over here the user profile properties, where you would be seeing your last genre updated over here, right? So, and again, if the rest of the user profile properties are not something that you have set, these are the default user properties that are set by Mixpanel when you use Mixpanel's SDK. Now, with this, what you see is that you have a card of the user profile that you are working with. Now, this user profiles card would have all the information that you are capturing, and you would want to have this as updated. But not only that, you would also be having all the events that this user has passed in a chronological order, right? And what you have essentially done is you have implemented Mixpanel on your platform. So the next thing you can do is start tracking more and more events on the platform. Now, going back to while we know how to implement Mixpanel, right? But how do we have a good documentation on how to maintain these events and properties? The answer is yes. As a follow-up to this webinar, what we will be doing is we will be sharing this deck with you over the email, and also you could find it as an article. So we do have an article on how to create something called as a tracking plan. Now, the tracking plan would be a complete document for you, which would be a living document, where you would be documenting all the events that you want to implement, and also the properties that you want to implement with these events, right? This allows you to keep a note of every event that you have implemented on your platform. And if there are any future implementations, you could keep adding on to that as a document. So we will be sharing that article with you over as a part of the next, as a follow-up to this webinar. Now, while we have seen the live demonstration, I would want Ashna to open up a few quiz questions we have based on the things we have just discussed. Yeah, okay. So we have the first question where we are asking in which of these would be not cost as, yeah. Okay. So I hope everyone's answered this question. Can we move to the next question? Yeah, okay. Let's move on to the final question for the quiz. And what we'll be doing post this is we will be discussing the answers and we'll be seeing how many of y'all have answered it correctly. And we'll be discussing why that option was the correct one to go ahead with. Okay. Yeah, let's see the answers to this now. Okay. Yeah. So the first question was, in which of these values for the cost cannot be aggregated by Mixpanel? So the answer is none of the above. Now, while we were discussing that whenever you're sending a numeric value, Mixpanel allows you to do numeric operations. So while the first one is in a proper numeric format, which is a decimal value, Mixpanel would be using this to aggregate. Jumping on to option C, since it is a fraction, which Mixpanel converts as a decimal value, you would be seeing something this also as a numeric property, and Mixpanel will allow you to aggregate. Now, the trick over here was question B, option B, where you are sending a numeric value, but you are putting it under quotes. So Mixpanel will read this as a string. While your raw data does read value 100 as a string, however, Mixpanel's UI is loosely typecasted. That means what it does is that even if you are sending a numeric value under as a string, you could forcefully typecast this value as a numeric value and allow Mixpanel to apply mathematical operations on it. And for that reason, the answer is D, none of the above. And this is something that also comes along with a best practice recommendation, right? That while Mixpanel does allow you to typecast string values into numeric, if you're sending a numeric value under double quotes, we highly recommend you pass numeric values as a number in a number data type, because this would actually keep your implementation clean. Now, the second question over here was not which of the following would not be a Boolean false, and the answer is B. And let me explain this to you. Now, whenever you're sending a Boolean true or Boolean false, they are not to be sent in under double quotes, because that would be a string false and a string true. So developers, whenever you're sending a true or false, the ideal way of sending a true or false would be true and false in its state without the double quotes, right? However, Mixpanel does allow certain additional options as well. So if you're sending 0, that also would be considered as a Boolean false. So this 0 could be either a string 0 or this could be a numeric 0, right? If you send true or false as a string as well, this also is something that would be considered as a true or false. And if you send an empty string, this also would be considered as a false. However, when you send null in double quotes and not null as a value null, Mixpanel treats this as a string anything but a false, right? So when you're sending null as a string, this would be considered as a Boolean true for Mixpanel. And this is where another recommendation of best practices come whenever you're implementing Boolean values in your properties, is that you would have to ensure that you send true and false in its correct state. And in case you're using something like 1 and 0, you can go ahead and do that. But anything apart from that in a Boolean value would be considered as a true if it's not one of these, the other mentioned options. Going to the third question, which is the correct way of sending list values, right? Now, there are different ways that we perceive list values to exist on a platform, right? However, the best way of sending it is option C. So what we have done is we have created an array with square brackets, and each of the items in the array is a string in itself. Now, this is exactly the correct way of sending list items to Mixpanel, right? Now, whenever you are passing it in any of the other formats, because they are under double quotes, Mixpanel will consider this as a single string value. So the first option, where you have all the array list items in a brace brackets, but these are not sent in the correct format, Mixpanel will treat this as a single string value. So will be the case for option B and option D. So the correct answer over here is option C. Anyway, so I hope this has been a very informative quiz for you guys. Now, we do have certain questions that we will be taking up with which you have been putting in the Q&A section, and also some of the questions that we had shared, that you guys had shared before the start of this webinar. I'll stop my screen from sharing and I will start taking up these questions right now. So if you have any questions, what I highly recommend is you start pasting them inside the Q&A section of the webinar, or of the Zoom webinar that we have. Now, the very first question by Dan is, hello there, question about session start. How do I find which specific event triggered a session start? So that's a very good question. Whenever you go to your project setting, one thing that you would notice is that one of the sections in your project setting talk about session timeouts, right? Now, sessions could be defined either based on timeouts or based on events. So this is a configuration we allow our customers to configure for their specific use case. So let's say that you have a timeout based product, where if there is an inactivity of, let's say, 10 minutes, you want the session to be considered as session end. You could configure that on your project setting. If you have a specific session start event and a session end event, this is something that you can mention over there, that this is the session start and this is the session end. And this is something that Mixpanel will consider as your session length. Anything between this can be considered as a session length. Now, talking about session start and session end as events, these are virtual events that are created by Mixpanel based on your project configuration. So let's say if you have configured your project to be a timeout based session, where your timeout condition is 10 minutes. So the moment you initiate Mixpanel's SDK, calling mixpanel.init with your project token, you would have a virtual session start event that would be marked over there by Mixpanel. And the moment the last event happens, and if there is an inactivity of 10 minutes on that instance of Mixpanel, you would have a virtual session end event marked over there. So when you export the data out of Mixpanel, you would not see session start and session end as events, because these are not physical events that are sent to Mixpanel. I hope that has helped you answer your question. We have another question where for each unique user, I attach a user ID to the user using mixpanel.people.get getPeople.set. Okay. However, sometimes a distinct ID that I see in Mixpanel dashboard is not the user ID I set. May I know? Yeah, that's a very good question actually. So like I said, whenever a user comes onto your platform anonymously, right? And when you initiate Mixpanel will generate a random distinct ID for this anonymous user. Now, let's say this user, Charlie, has come onto your platform and has registered. And on a successful registration, your product generates a user ID for this user, which could be Charlie123, right? So what you would have to do is you would have to call mixpanel.identify and you send in Charlie123 as the argument. Now, what Mixpanel does is that, let's say in the future, there is an event that is coming to Mixpanel with the distinct ID as Charlie123. Mixpanel would know which this event should be associated to which profile that is created within Mixpanel, right? Having said that, Mixpanel, what it does in the back is it starts creating a cluster of identifiers. Now, this cluster includes Charlie123, which is your user ID, but also the random distinct IDs that Charlie is associated with. And those were distinct IDs that were before the login or the registration, the events that were generated by Charlie, right? Before the identification of Charlie. So Charlie as a profile would have multiple distinct IDs that are linked together. And what will happen is that out of these identifiers, now this identity cluster that was created for Charlie also needs an identifier within Mixpanel, right? So Mixpanel has a logic to choose, has an algorithm to choose one of these distinct IDs to be the canonical ID. Now, the canonical ID is not something that is very specific for you guys and something that you would have to worry about. But all you have to know is that the canonical ID is the identifier of the cluster that you have created for every user that is coming onto your platform. So it's something that Mixpanel has a logic inside. But what you can absolutely do is you can search for your users in the user section of Mixpanel, and you could find the information over for that user. So that should not be a problem. Hope that's helped you. Will the recording be available afterwards? I want to say yes. So in a follow-up email post this webinar, you would be getting a recording of the complete of the complete webinar that we are having right now. Not only that, you would also be getting access to the deck that I had shared. And these decks actually have links which are super resourceful for not only developers, but also project managers, because these links would also be links to articles, which would be super helpful for you. So one of the articles that I will be sharing with you as a link in this deck is an article to creating a tracking plan. Now, why is this important? Is because project managers or teams or data teams that are actually looking into maintaining events and properties that are implemented on your platform, we have a sample documentation, right? So we have a template document that is available in that article. Not only that, we also have samples. So if you are an e-commerce business and you are a finance business and you want a sample tracking plan, this is something that is available on that article as well. So you can have access to those as a part of the email that would be coming up following the webinar. So yeah, hope that has been helpful for you. I do see there are certain questions which are also present in the chat. So I'll be taking them up because I do not see them in the Q&A section. How to track unused features. I use Mixpanel to track most used features user used, but I do not know how to check unused features. Now, so here's the thing, right? Every time a user explores a feature on your product, you would be generating events for them, right? Now, while these, now this is something coming from an experienced Mixpanel implementation user. I have been one past my role over here. And one thing I can tell you is that every feature has an entry point, right? And these entry points are actually visual cues to understand if the user will be entering the feature or not. So one of the recommendations that I can tell you with my past experience is that if you are tracking events which are entry cues to a feature on your platform, you can use your funnel analysis on Mixpanel to identify if there is a drop off, right? Just before entering the feature that is there on your platform, if there is a heavy drop off, this is where you want to check why is that happening. And this could be one of ways to understand if a feature is being used a lot, or a lot of users on your platform are digressing away from that feature. Hope that has been helpful. Okay, I do see a follow-up to Dan's question on session start. So just a follow-up question regarding session start. We use segment to send events to Mixpanel on session start event. We cannot break down user using one of the properties. Yes. So like I said, session start and session end are virtual events. So the super properties that you do register on your platform, and you also have certain specific properties that you are sending with events, are something that would not be available for those session starts. Having said that, because session starts and session end are something that are virtual events, but still at the end of the day, they are associated to the user. So what you could do is you could start using Mixpanel's user profile properties against the session start events. What that would allow you to do is that, let's say if you have a user profile property called as subscription status, right? Whether you are keeping a tab of users that are free, the subscription status is free versus paid, and you want to do an analysis of what are the how many session starts or session ends are happening for free versus paid. Now, because these are user profile properties, you could break them down by user profile properties, right? But if there are any very specific questions that, hey, I want a specific property to be a part of the session start, session end, for more questions, you could definitely reach out to our support team and they'll be more than happy to help you out. Yes. Okay. Now, there were, like I said before, the webinar was open to the folks. We had asked a few questions at the time of registering for the webinar, right? While most of the questions that I was looking around, I did find them about how to plan, test, and execute tracking plan. Now, this is something that I have shown you as an example, that we have the event section and we have the user section. Now, the event section allows you to see in live what events you are sending into your from your platform to Mixpanel. You can see them live in the event section when you refresh it, and you also see your your user properties being implemented on the profile that you have identified, right? These are something that are almost real time, that are being updated on Mixpanel. Now, this is coming to tracking plan. Like I said, we will be sharing you an article as a part of the deck, which would allow you to see a template of the tracking plan that we have, and we also have samples for it, right? One of the questions that also one of our attendees had asked is how easy it is to integrate Mixpanel. Now, I think that question I have answered by just showing you a live demonstration, right? I literally initiated Mixpanel on a web platform. I send in tracking events whenever I have identified a trigger point for a user. It is as easy as showing it to you live, how to implement Mixpanel on the web platform, right? Talking about other platforms, a developer who is proficient with, and let's say Android environment, or iOS with Swift or Objective-C, it is very simple for those developers to implement Mixpanel on their platform. Not only that, we have a documentation center called as developers.mixpanel.com, which are super resourceful and as clear as possible that we can make it. So these should be super helpful at the time of implementation. Now, one of the other questions was how fast we can see the result. So this is again something that was a part of the live demonstration, right? It's near real time. So the moment you send an event into from your website, you would see that almost instantaneously reflecting on Mixpanel, not only in the event section, but also available for your analysis. Now, there are certain questions around, hey, in Android, we do see events coming in a bit late as a minute late, right? So because Mixpanel's client SDKs such as Android and Objective-C do work with offline events as a feature, for applications that do work offline and generate events offline, we have something called as flush interval. So I would highly recommend you go to the developers.mixpanel.com and read more about flush. What it allows you to do is, if you want to modify your flush intervals, or you want to flush the event directly to Mixpanel and not batch it, these are certain things that you can do. So hope that answers your question. Now, apart from that, we have again repetitive questions on how to track events properly and how to implement them. So these are something that we have addressed in this, right? Now, a few questions were outside the implementation practice. So they weren't around, hey, how do I implement Mixpanel, or how do I maintain a document? But these are more around that we have started implementing Mixpanel and we want to see the benefits of Mixpanel on the website. Now, the benefits are something that you would see once you start creating reports. You start creating reports using our insights, funnels, flows, and you start having key KPIs that you are tracking on, that you want to track using Mixpanel. Once you start creating reports, we highly recommend you create dashboards out of these reports so that you could have a holistic view of how your platform is working, right? And how are they performing? Now, these dashboards allow you to see trends. They allow you to see funnel conversions and how many of them are actually converting to goal. Not only that, funnels allow you to see at what point you have a major drop off in your funnels or in your user journey. So you could start focusing on those user journeys and start working on them to optimize those user journeys for a better user experience, right? So Mixpanel allows you to not only see your current implementation, but once you have fixed this implementation for a different app version, you can again check the same funnel and you can find that, hey, now my funnel conversion has improved. So this is a big step. And the next percentage of drop off is something that you want to work on. So Mixpanel allows you to continuously track your KPIs and improve your funnel conversions and your user experience consistently. Now, how can we, one of the questions also outside the implementation was, how can we know if a feature is the most used or which of the features have bad performance, right? Now, this exactly is something, one of the examples that I was talking about is that funnels for user journeys are one of the most important reporting that every product manager wants to work on, right? So there is a user journey in your platform. This could be a payment journey. This could be a registration or a login journey, right? And these are critical journeys for product teams to track. Now, Mixpanel allows you to track every event, whichever event you want to track. And not only allow that, but you could have user journeys across identification as well. So pre-login or pre-registration, if the user was not an identified user, but post a successful registration, this user has been identified and has done a key business KPI. You can create funnels to see if your user journey is working as per expectation, or if the user journey in the real world is performing as expectation or not. if you see a drop off, these are points that you can take back to your design team or any other team and start working on making a better user journey for the product. So there are a few more questions around how we can use Mixpanel. We are going to have future webinars where we are going to talk about, now that you have implemented Mixpanel, so you have events coming into Mixpanel's UI, you do see events. What are the best ways or the best reporting type to use for certain use cases? There are going to be webinars that are going to be focused on that. So please be in touch with our webinar section of the Mixpanel website, and if there are any future webinars, we will be updating there, so you could register for them and you could see and you could have a training session for that as well. So if there are any other further questions, I'm open to take them. So you can type it in your Q&A section. We have answered all the questions that are currently over here. So I am going to be clicking on answer live. Yes. Okay, if there are no other further questions, thank you so much for the webinar today, for coming to the and attending the webinar today. We will be following up with everyone with the link and an email. So yeah, thank you so much.